It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Dan Hampton. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I am very good, Douglas. Thanks. Yourself?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So you are a retired lieutenant colonel, the United States Air Force. You flew 151 combat missions. Is that right? Wow.
That is correct. Yep, I did.
Well, thank you for your service, first of all. And you were in the Iraq War, Kosovo conflict, first Gulf War. What kind of planes were you flying?
I flew the F-16 primarily.
Oh, okay, very nice. Is the training long for that? I mean, how long do you train before they let you loose?
Well, first you have to get into the program, which by itself is sort of a feat. And then basic pilot training is a year. And then to get into fighters, when I did it anyway, you had to be in the top 5% of your class, which was usually the first 2 or 3 guys. And then after that, when you went off to whatever fighter you were going to fly, for the F-16 at that time, it took about 10 and a half months before you're a qualified wingman, which means you have to go out and fly with somebody else, in another airplane. And then after that, you slowly climb up the pyramid. There's different levels, different types of pilots. There are flight leads, there are instructor pilots, and there are what are called weapons officers, which are responsible for most of the fighting and the training in a fighter squadron. Okay.
So did you go through ROTC?
I went through the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, so yeah, I got a reserve commission, but it was a military school. It was like, VMI or the Citadel.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right, great. You certainly have got a lot of medals, a lot of distinguishing medals. Your dress uniform must be really heavy with all of those.
I wouldn't know. I only wore it twice in my career.
Amazing. Yeah, Purple Heart and Meritorious Service, 5 Meritorious Service medals. Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of a minor. I don't. I keep trying to get them to take all that stuff off, and they won't. So anyway.
Well, it's very impressive, and it's very commendable, and certainly we thank you for your service to our country. Having said that, we are here to talk about a book that you wrote called Valor, and this story, just from the sort of synopsis that I read, was really incredible. William Bill Harris, this was during World War II, and he was captured by the Japanese. How did you even find out about this story? Are you related to him in some way?
Oh, not at all. I found out about him because the book previous to this was called Vengeance, and it took place largely on Guadalcanal. And I ran across a General Field Harris, who is Bill's father. He was a Marine pilot on Guadalcanal, and I thought it was interesting that the father and son were both fighting in the same war in the same theater of operations. So when I finished that last book and time came for a new one, I looked into Bill a little bit deeper and found out, most of his incredible story. And then his daughter had a 1,500-page handwritten manuscript that Bill had put together after the war. And so she made that available to me, and the book just sort of fell into place.
Was the manuscript, was it that detailed that you could actually pull a whole book out of it?
Well, not the whole book. I had to weave in the historical stuff, and I always try to put in, I think people find the social things interesting. What were people doing for fun when World War II broke out? What did things cost? What were the stupid things that Congress was up to? Things we can all identify with. So I put all of that in there, but all the dialogue, the first-person stuff, his thoughts and feelings, that all came right out of his book.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you kind of padded it up with background, right? To get it
right.
Yeah.
The the other people concerned, like his father and his mother and then his future wife, I had all their letters and some of their writings too. So all of that helped. I just had to kind of string it together in a way that would make people want to read it.
Okay, well, without giving too much of the story away, this is a true story. And he was captured by the Japanese. He spent time as a POW. Apparently he was tortured and starved and beaten, and he managed to escape.
That's correct. He was on the loose in the Philippines for about a year before he was betrayed and recaptured again. And this time he ended up in a POW camp in Japan. Okay.
And then finally he got out, right, after liberation, after the atomic bombs and Japan surrendered?
Yes, he was not one of the POWs that the Japanese killed, which they did. And he was fortunately liberated and made it back to the United States.
Okay. Do you know what happened to him after that? Did he live a long life, or what did he do after the war?
No, he didn't live that long of a life, but I don't want to give the whole game away.
Okay. All right.
There's a chapter at the very end of the book dedicated to what happened to him after World War II.
Let me hit a couple of your talking points here. It says Harris was the son of a decorated Marine general. What was their relationship like?
Probably like most relationships between fathers and sons then. It was a bit formal and probably what we would consider distant. They weren't quite as warm and friendly as we are. But the father dearly loved the son, and I, as a father myself, I can't imagine not knowing for 3.5 years whether my son was alive or dead. That just had to be awful. And Bill respected and admired his own father greatly, and all of that kind of comes out in their letters to each other.
Okay, was his father? I'm guessing his father might have been a World War I veteran.
He was an early, I think, a 1917 graduate of the Naval Academy, and Bill was born shortly after that.
It's interesting about war because, and the timing. We've had the draft in this country for a long time, up until the early 70s, and both myself and my grandfather kind of missed the wars because of when we were born. But my father got into Korea in 1950. My grandfather was too young for the First World War and too old for the Second one, and I was too young for Vietnam and too old for the Gulf War. So we never served.
Good then.
We never had to go, but my father did. He went to Korea. What do you think about the draft? Do you think that we should bring it back?
I would rather have a small, relatively happy professional military than a large, unwieldy, unhappy military. And if you force people into military service without a national emergency like World War II was, that's what you're going to get. I mean, we saw that in Vietnam, and if you look at the news from the Ukraine, that's one reason, only one, though, that Russia is just falling flat on its face, because they're using conscripts. They have no motivation or desire to fight, and there's no national emergency facing Russia, so there's no cause, right? And in our case, nobody would argue that World War II was a national emergency. I mean, it was a global emergency. We saw the problems that occurred during Vietnam because that really wasn't a national emergency, and you're forcing people into uniform into something they don't really want to do. The results are more or less inevitable,
All right. Well, you went voluntarily, so... Well,
you can't draft officers.
Yeah.
And I was an officer. But if your dad was in Korea, I think you'd really enjoy the very end of Valor, because that deals with Korea.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
Okay.
Well,
yeah.
let's go back to Russia and the Ukraine for a second. Like you said, the Russian soldiers, and these days with instant media, we see these guys, they're kids. They're 18, 19, but some of them look like they're about 14 or 15. And they've obviously been drafted. What do you suspect that Putin is telling them as to why that they're there?
I think he made up that whole ridiculous, Nazi idiocy, which is so stupid since Zelensky's a Jew.
Yeah.
So the Russians have an inherent hatred of all things Nazi. for obvious reasons, right? That was the last big national emergency Russia faced. So I think Putin lied to them, and I don't know why anybody would believe that tiny Ukraine is going to be a threat to Russia, but, he's their president, and Russians, one of their greatest strengths and one of their greatest weaknesses is just their dogged persistence, and they don't really like to change things unless it gets really bad, and they're going to be comfortable being told what to do. And, that's what Putin does. He's a dictator. He calls himself a president, but he's not. So, they like being told what to do. The real danger for Putin now is that he is not running the Soviet Union. This is Russia. And this is 2022. It's not 1970. So you can't just lock down the country and kill off the communications. People will find a way to know the truth, especially when the body bags start coming back, right? You can't hide that. You can't hide the fact that you lost the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. And I think he's rightfully so very concerned about what his own people are going to do if they ever really find out the truth. So let's hope they do.
Well, can he be voted out?
Voted out, kind of like he was voted in, right?
Well, exactly,
Yeah, no, they can't be voted anywhere, but when the people around him decide that he is not helping them and having him where he is not in their interests, then hopefully they'll do something. Or, maybe there could be another Russian revolution like they saw in 1917. I mean, every now and again the Russians get fed up with everything, and they rise up and they revolt and they make a vast sweeping change. That's the thing all Russian leaders, whether it's a czar or a commissar, have always been afraid of.
Well, there's certainly no strangers to revolution in that country, but the war is going very badly for Putin. And in fact, I just saw today that the news medias are hinting that he might be winding this thing down somehow. How does he make an exit?
I don't think he's going to make an exit. I think he's going to hold on to the eastern Ukraine, and he's going to hope that he can wait us out. The West, and particularly the United States, has a relatively short attention span. And besides, he's sitting all over the eastern Ukraine, so there's really not a way to get him out unless the Ukrainians do it. So I think he's gonna settle down and settle for his part of the eastern Ukraine while he figures out what to do, or before somebody puts a bullet in his head. So
this is like a halftime show?
Yeah, stalemate, halftime show, trench warfare on the Western Front, something like that. He's lost momentum. They lost it in the first 3 to 5 days, and they never got it back. And as long as the Ukrainians keep getting what they need to fight, I think they have a very, very good chance of winning this thing.
Well, God bless the Ukrainian people. I mean, their resolve has been just stunning.
Right. Well, what else would you do? And I hope and I believe that in this country we still have that. At least most of us do. If we were invaded, if we were facing a national catastrophe like that, I think most people would find the strength and the resilience and the defiance within themselves to fight back and do what we had to do.
I would hope so, although it depends on what side of the political aisle you're on as to the answer to that question, because I think there are, at least the media tends to portray the more radical left wing as not being very supportive of the United States. Now, how they would react to a direct invasion, I don't know.
Well, I don't either, and I don't think we're going to find out, because invading the United States would be absolutely ridiculous. But, if you look at two brief periods in fairly recent history, you can see where for a while there, everybody kind of forgot their petty differences and realized that we all have more in common than we have apart. If you look at what happened after September 11th, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at the initial stages of the COVID pandemic, for a while there, everybody threw together and worked pretty well together and forgot about all the trivial, petty, ridiculous, downright silly things that seem to occupy much of our time. So I have faith in most of my fellow Americans, and I think we would come through it okay.
The comparison that I like to make, at least it seems like with the Ukrainian people, is it seems very similar to our American Revolutionary War, where this ragtag bunch of patriots took on the most powerful military on the planet at the time with the British Army. And they had the resolve, and the British Army really didn't.
Well, that's the point. The British Army was technically superior, but a lot of those soldiers didn't want to be here, and they had no reason to fight and die for, in North America. We were fighting for our homes and families, very close by. You could make the same argument in the Civil War. You could make the same argument, as you said, for the Ukrainians. It's a big motivator when the people and the cause you're fighting for is right there in front of you. So, I think you're exactly right.
So is there any way that Putin's going to come out of this without being taken out?
Oh, sure. I mean, he's spent 20 years fortifying his position in his inner circle. It's entirely possible that he'll survive. But, what's going to happen when the news is eventually turned back on and the people inside Russia find out what really happened? They've been told right now everything they're hearing is propaganda and fake news, but sooner or later the truth's going to come out, and that's really where it'll be interesting to see what happens to Putin if he lives that long.
Well, that's what's amazing to me is that the Russian people, I would assume most of them have cell phones and smartphones, and there's Twitter and video clips going out every second of the day. And to keep them completely in the dark about what's really happening is unbelievable to me.
Yeah, but it's a communist country. They may not claim it, but it was definitely structured along those lines. And even though they're not communists per se at the moment, they still have that, 70-odd years of government control bred into them. And so the government can and has shut down, huge chunks of that society in a way that no other country could except perhaps China. We don't grasp that fully unless you've lived in a communist country or traveled into one, or an autocratic country like Russia is, the absolute power that somebody like that can wield. But like you also said, there are cracks in the dike, and even though he's shut all that stuff down for the moment, it can't last. I mean, like I said, this is not the Soviet Union, and this is not 1970. He can't lock down the entire country like they used to do indefinitely.
Well, I guess it remains to be seen, but it looks like it's not going well. And
yeah, well, you'd like to hope in a country that big they'll get the truth out sooner or later. And I remember how monumentally pissed off the Russians were when they found out in 1991 that they'd been lied to all those years. I can only hope that the same sort of anger is generated when they find out, about Putin's war.
Yeah. All right, Dan. Well, let's wrap this up. Your book is called Valor, and it is available now. Is it out?
Yes, it came out last Tuesday, so it's available through all the normal outlets, specifically Amazon and all the bookstores.
Okay. Do you have a website you want to give out, a personal one or one for the book?
I don't have a website, but there's an author Facebook page, and people contact me there all the time. So if anybody wants to talk or ask a question, I will always answer. It may take me a while, but I will always answer.
Okay. Do you know, is it just Dan Hampton author?
That's it. Yep.
That's okay.
It.
All right. Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming on. It was great talking to you, and best of luck with the book. And don't get interview burnout. Take a little break and...
Well, you're the last one today, Douglas, so that's good.
Oh, okay.
The
all right.
show resumes tomorrow, but thank you for having me and for sparing me the time, and read the last chapter of Valor as it's about Korea, and you might find it interesting.
Yeah, definitely. We'll check it out. All right, Dan.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Okay, take care.